Welcome to the Landscape Photography Show, episode number 26. And we are delighted to have a wonderful three-peat instructor with us, David Marx. And if you watched our anniversary show, number 25, 2 weeks ago, you'll notice that he had been absolutely adored by the landscape photography viewers. So we're excited to hear about Lightroom and some of the wonderful tricks that he has. I'm Cara Riley and the founder of Photo Tour Global Directory, where consumers can connect with photographers all over the world for workshops and tours. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim Worthman. He's going to introduce himself, and then we'll get to our show starters.
Thanks, Cara. My name's Jim Worthman. I'm kind of a amateur photographer based in Phoenix, Arizona, the lovely desert Southwest. I'm active both in the landscape photography theme and the landscape photography community, and I do tonight have a special announcement, and for those of you old enough to remember Schoolhouse Rock, this is brought to you by the letters B and W. So the landscape photography community has just opened a new category for monochrome. So if you haven't stopped by the community, I'd encourage you to do that. Take a look at the monochrome category, and by all means, we'd like to see some of your great monochrome work. That's it. So, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I'm Tom Hurl, and I'm in Carmel, California, on the Central Coast of California. I'm an amateur photographer and curator on the landscape photography theme, and enjoy being a panel member on the show. So let me bounce it over to Kevin now.
Let's go to Margaret, actually.
Oops.
Hi, everyone. I'm Margaret Tompkins from Kansas City, Missouri, which has been looking a lot like Antarctica lately. I've been posting snowy pictures lately. It looks more like Kevin's neck of the woods out there in the mountains of Utah. But we've been inundated with lots of snow and ice and cold temperatures that we're not normally used to here. So I've been kind of snowed in and kind of going crazy here. So you'll have to just bear with me, I think. Great to be with you this evening. I'm so excited about seeing David Marx here on our show. I think I've learned more from David than I do anyone else. He just has such a wonderful way of presenting things. But I'm an amateur photographer, retired, and I just got my big girl camera, a Canon 6D, my first full sensor camera. So I've been trying to play with that, even though the weather hasn't been cooperating with me very well. So, but I'm a full-fledged amateur and just love taking landscape photographs. And I, like Jim, work both the community, landscape photography community, and the landscape photography theme, as well as Kevin does both of those too. So great to be here this evening, and now I will turn it over to Kevin.
All right. Thanks, Margaret. So, yeah, I'm Kevin Rowe, and I'm in South Jordan, Utah. And though I'm in the mountains, it's rained down in the valley here in the Salt Lake Valley, and it's just been snowing up in the mountains, which I like. You know, I like to keep it nice and keep the roads all clear down here in the valley, and tons of snow up in the mountains. So that's been good. One other thing that I do is I put together a monthly slideshow with all of the best of the best that we've shared to the landscape photography theme, and I'll have the one for January out here in the next couple days, so stop by and check that out, and make sure you're sharing all your photos with the appropriate tags so that we can find your photos so you can make that slideshow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into our show starter, so let me share my screen here. Okay, does everyone have that? So this is...
There we go. There it is.
Good. Okay. So this is my my pick, and this is George Fletcher, and this is just an awesome overlook he's found here and got a great picture of. And George is a regular contributor and does a great job.
Awesome shot.
And I believe this is you, Margaret?
Yes, that's mine. Richard Creamer, who's one of our regular contributors. That's a beautiful shot of Yosemite. Just love the waterfall there, the water, the reflections, the trees, the granite, just everything. Just awesome photograph there. Wonderful light, just absolutely gorgeous. So that was my pick for the show starter.
Beautiful. Thanks, Margaret. And Tom?
I picked this one from Gunther Zettel. I really like the crispness of this. I liked all the gray rocks and the gray sky, highlighted by the bright sunset. I also liked how it was balanced with the sunset on one side and the lighthouse with the little red light on the other side. So this one really appealed to me.
Yeah, I love the mood in that. That's great.
We can feel it.
And then Cara.
All right. This is Tom Sloan, who is also a regular contributor to the landscape photography theme. And I just love the way that you can see the snow and the footsteps that are in there, but the amazing light rays as the blue hour was approaching, and I really think the balance here is nice. So excellent work, Tom Sloan. Thanks for sharing with our event and becoming a show starter.
Yeah, we love Tom. Tom's always got great stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, and then David, this was your pick.
Yeah, this one is from, I'm going to butcher the name, Jorg Schumacher. And I just think the leading line of the road there pulls my eye right into the scene, and I love the background atmosphere, and just think it has a real sense of travel and dynamic motion, and it's got something of interest on every plane. I like it.
All right, great, yeah, beautiful.
I like it too.
Yeah.
Okay, and then last one, Jim?
Yeah, thanks. This is Robert Glockner. And I love the composition and the silhouette, the saturated colors. It all worked well for me. The reflection, of course, and you know, in his comment there, you can see it. He did a 2-exposure HDR, and he talks about, you know, a little bit about his workflow with Photomatics and Lightroom, and then finishing it off in Color Efex Pro. So I thought that was apropos to our chat tonight.
Great. Yeah, I think so. So that brings us to our main man for today, is David Marx, and David does quite a few workshops and things, and I'm sure we'll put up his information in the show notes after the show. So if you like what you hear, you might want to check him out and get some more information. But we'll go over to you, David.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's see. First, it's an honor. I'm thrilled to be here again. I think it was about almost a year ago that I first met most of you, Jim and Cara, and Margaret. I'd met in person a little before that. But it's just a pleasure to be back, and I'm just so delighted that this has passed 25, 26. Are we at 27? Somewhere in there.
We're on 26.
26. What a remarkable accomplishment, and really what an honor to be here. And so tonight, what I thought I would show just some of my favorite buttons in Adobe Photoshop Lightroom for working primarily with landscape photography. So let's see. Let me bring up Lightroom here, and let me switch to screen sharing, and you guys tell me.
Oops.
I get this wrong. So let's see.
Oh, good. We didn't lose you.
So let me make this a little bigger on the screen. And at this point, hopefully you're seeing, about 7 or so of my photos inside of Lightroom.
Yes, we are. We can see that.
Awesome. So what I did for tonight is I picked out 6 or 7 little example photos from places I've shot or places I'm going, And I thought I would just show a couple of the buttons in the fun part of Lightroom, in the Develop module, just some simple tricks that can improve photos like this quickly and easily. Now, so what I'll do is I'll take, say, this first photo, and I'll slide from Lightroom's Library module over to Develop. Two easy ways to do this. You can click Develop up here on the what they call the module picker, this top right side of the screen, or keyboard shortcut is the letter D. I wish all the shortcuts were that easy, but off to Develop we go. Now, I have to point out something here about the type of file I'm working with. I'm working with a DNG file, a raw file. Could be CR2 from a Canon, could be NEF from a Nikon, OLY from an Olympus, on and on and on. But the button I want to show first is one that you won't have, or you won't have any fun with if you're photographing in JPEG. Now, I don't mean to say that photographing in JPEG is bad or that you'll lose out on this in life, but if you shoot in JPEG, the button I'm about to demo, you had that choice in your camera before you clicked the trigger. If you shoot in RAW, one advantage is you get this what I'll call bonus button when you get home. And the bonus button lives, of all bizarre places, in the last panel of Lightroom's Develop module. It lives down here in camera calibration, which sounds really scary. And in fact, within that scary panel, it lives here where it says Profile. Now, a lot of the stuff in camera calibration is scary, but this Profile button, not at all. This Profile button, what it really is, or what I would have described it as, is the film I wish I'd had in my camera back in the film photography days. So let me click here, and a little list will pop up. Now I have to explain that the list that you might see with your files and the list that I'm going to see may be different. The list that pops up here, Adobe Standard, Camera Landscape, hopefully you guys can see those. These are the profiles that Adobe has created. I would call them film types for a Canon photographer. A Nikon photographer will see a different list. Olympus photographer, yet another list. Now again, these only appear if you're shooting in RAW. But watch what happens if I pick, instead of the standard type of film, what if I had, say, landscape film in my camera? For those with a background in photography, like for you, Jim, I know that we'd talked about black and white before. Back in the day, do you remember Fuji Velvia or E100 VS?
Mm-hmm.
When we used to shoot Velvia or E100 VS, the Kodak equivalent, the very saturated, what we were buying was a film whose chemistry had been tailored to do two things: add saturation, add contrast to a color photo. So when I pick Camera Landscape, can you see the difference here? Let me turn this on and off. Watch these blues, like up here in this corner, before, or sorry, this would be before, after. Can you see a big difference in the contrast and in the saturation of the blue? Before,
yes.
After. Here, let me show it this way. Let me split the screen right and left so you can see a standard interpretation of color. Let me zoom in, say, down here. Standard, pretty low muted pastel, much more vibrant, much higher contrast, or I think perhaps these are even more telling. Stronger, bluer clouds, kind of flat gray clouds. So for the photographer who's shooting primarily landscape photos in RAW, you might find that telling it to start with a higher contrast, higher saturation interpretation of color gives you a better starting point in a single button. And in fact, a lot of folks like me who sort of beta test for Adobe, folks who do this all the time, we begged for them to put this starting point button up here at the top of the basic panel. But they won't. And the reason they won't is, I think, I can't speak for Adobe, I'm not, an employee, the reason they won't move it up there is, of course, that button does nothing for the JPEG photographer. If you're shooting in JPEG, you have the same settings, the same button, but you have it inside the camera, and so the choice is made at the time of capture. So they hide it down here, and they give it a scary name. But it's so powerful to go from this, say this to this in a single button. It's a great one for me. Let me show you one more of these just for demo. How about, let's see if this will work. I'll take a flower, a sunset shot, fairly standard landscape. Right now, it's in the standard interpretation of color. Let's call that a flat, muted, sort of neutral film. Let's see what happens if I flip through the list. This would be another interpretation of color. This would be the, quote, landscape interpretation. This is the even more neutral. This is the portrait interpretation. And another set of colors. Now, the thing I want to point out here is I don't always pick landscape. In this case, I think it looks pretty good, but I also think the portrait one looked pretty good. That I flip through this list with every photo I bring in, and I ask myself which one will give me the best starting point. Let's see if you can see the difference when I zoom in here. Can you see the flower and the clouds behind it?
Mm-hmm.
If I have the choice, I'd rather start with this cloud and this flower than the more pastel over here on the left. Now, what I have to say, though, is just because you pick a better starting point, the job isn't done. What this photo needs, it needs to be a little brighter, it needs more detail in the highlights, it needs more detail in the shadows, a white, a black, some more vibrance, some more contrast. But with just a couple of buttons, we can go from, say, there on the left to there on the right. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah? And this is one of the reasons that shooting in RAW for the landscape photographer might be advantageous. The advantage is that when you get home, you can control all the interpretation of color. Should it be standard? Should it be faithful? Should it be... the words don't really mean anything to me. What I care about is what I call the visual pop. And if I can get this kind of pop compared to, say, that in 5 buttons, I'm a pretty happy guy. Because this is what I want. This is the kind of photo I want to display.
David?
Sure.
Just a real quick question. A lot of times we end up having to dig detail out of the shadows, right? And it can get noisy. When you select, let's say, the landscape preset there, and as your starting point, it really boosted the contrast. Does that affect your ability later to dig detail out of the shadows, or for that matter, out of the highlights?
I don't think it's going to affect your ability. Here, let me change from screen share back to let's see if my face comes back up. There we are. If I'm going to answer a question, I feel like it's weird to talk to a blank screen. I wouldn't say it's going to limit your ability to pull detail out of the highlights and shadows, but it does push the histogram when it adds contrast. It makes the darks darker and the lights lighter. Yeah. Some of the interpretations will push past that inky black. Some will push past paper white. So if you lose detail there, the stuff that's beyond the edge of the spectrum may be harder to recover. But on a photo where it doesn't push it off the scale, I don't think it's going to do you any harm.
Okay.
Mostly the highlights and shadows slider, they're going to pull the very darks, the very lights. Push those to paper white and inky black, you've limited your possibilities. But within the framework, within inky black and paper white, I think you'll be okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Good question.
David, one follow-on from that. Can I think of these as presets, maybe?
You can think of them as presets, but they're camera or brand of camera specific. So they're a little different than a preset that says add saturation, which would be, say, camera brand irrelevant. That what Adobe has tried to do for more technicals, they've tried to reverse engineer the picture styles or profiles
Right.
that you have inside your camera. So a Nikon user is going to have a different set of picture styles or profiles than a Canon user. And this is Adobe's way of basically keeping up with the options that a JPEG photographer, someone shooting in JPEG, would have. So yes, they are presets, but they're a little more nuanced than the presets that we see on the left side in Lightroom.
Okay. So say I do bring it in on the using the landscape mode that increases the saturation, increases the contrast, and I find I'm clipping at either end. Can I then roll back the contrast with the contrast slider?
Sure, because
And
these
just to back that way to kind of answer Jim's question.
Yeah, exactly. That these they're a starting point, not a finishing button. And ironically, they're where I start with every raw file, every landscape file that I bring in. I go and pick the one that best suits my needs, and then I go back up on the screen to the basic panel, to the contrast slider, to say, well, I like this as a starting point, but it's not perfect. I don't mean to say that these are a one-button panacea, that you push it and your photo is magically wonderful. But if I can start with, like in the old days, if I could buy Velvia and shoot Velvia for sunset, that was better than shooting a more neutral film, Provia or Ektachrome, or that they give me a better beginning, but not all. It's not everything in one.
Yeah, just real quick, I have I always use this. In fact, I use the camera landscape so often that I actually just have it as one of my presets for when I'm importing landscapes. And I'll go take it off sometimes. I'll go look at it, but like on my Canon files, you saw what he just had on there, versus my Sony files, I have about 5 more options in that screen. So they're different for each camera, like he was saying.
How does it determine from the file then that is brought in, that's imported, as to what options are available there?
Yep, absolutely, Margaret. What it's doing, what Adobe is cleverly doing, is they're reading the metadata, and where it says Canon camera or Canon 5D Mark III or Sony AR7, it says, oh, well, if that's the camera, then these are the profiles that would have been available, or our best guess at the profiles that are available internally within that model of camera. And so, like for a Nikon photographer, the list will say Nikon Vivid, Nikon D2X, Nikon, you know, it's looking at the metadata and saying, oh, well, these are the ones that make sense. Cool?
Yeah, good.
All right. Well, here, let me show you another button then. Let me see if I can redo this screen share. Awesome. Thanks, y'all. It's much more fun to talk to people than to a blank screen. Let's see. Are we back in Lightroom?
Not quite.
Nope.
Not quite? Oh.
No.
Let's see. Let me try that one more time. Screen share, desktop. And how'd I do this time?
There we go.
Oh. All right. So when I'm working on a file like this, I would love to tell you that I start in the Develop module in the Basic panel, but I don't. I start down here in the Camera Calibration panel. I pick my starting point, landscape, standard, portrait, whatever it happens to be, and then I go back up to Basic. And if it was always that clean and simple, I could deal. But there's one other button or one other set of buttons along the way that I really, really like. So let me slide over a photo. And this is one of the Northern Lights, of the Aurora. This is one I shot last year teaching a photography workshop. I'm headed back up there to Churchill, Manitoba in about 2 weeks. And you can see that I've already set it to landscape. And truth be told, I've already done some adjusting to make this photo look good on the screen. But there is a problem here. It's subtle, but a problem. And the problem is that I'm using this Canon 16 to 35 lens. Now this is like a fancy Canon L lens, but all lenses they bend light, and they vignette. To some degree, they're bowing. You can see how these trees kind of tilt in at a weird angle. And the corners in here are very, very dark. So one of the other buttons that I love in Lightroom, it's this whole panel called lens correction. And what lens correction will let us do, it will give the illusion of a better camera lens than I can actually afford, or to be honest, than Canon actually makes. So just to be fair, the 5-panel across that I have here, the one that says basic, profile, color, manual, that's the look in Lightroom 5. For folks using Lightroom 4, you'll have just 3 tabs, profile, color, and manual. For teaching purposes, let me start in the profile tab. Now, Margaret, you said when I was showing the landscape, the starting point, the film type buttons, you said, how does it know? Well, it reads the metadata. And the same thing ought to happen here. If I tell it to repair my lens, again, they use the scary word profile, but I would use the word the illusion of a better lens. When I turn this on, it's supposed to read what type of camera and what type of lens. Now let me turn this on and off a couple of times. Watch the corners of the photo down in here. Before, after.
Wow.
Can you see how much vignetting, how much shadow is cast down in those corners?
Yep.
Now there are times in photography when a vignette is beautiful. Like for Jim back in the darkroom days, we used to intentionally vignette the corners because it drives the eye into the middle. And so I don't mean to say that vignetting is always a bad thing, but I feel like here an awful lot of my photo is falling into inky black, where visually there's a whole lot more interest when that shadow that my lens is casting is removed. And in this case, it's literally one button easy. Now, the reason it's one button easy is that Adobe is able to read that this was shot with a Canon camera using this particular lens, and that they've done some testing and they've made this correction for this particular lens. In fact, what I'm going to pull up here is a whole list of all the different lenses that they have, quote, profiled, meaning tested. They've tested to say how much does it vignette, how much does it distort geometrically. Not every lens is on the list. And so here I want to point out that results will vary. If you're using a Canon camera and a Sigma lens, a Vivitar lens, a Zeiss lens, a third-party lens, it might not be in the list. If you're using an adapter, like on a mirrorless camera, so you can use, you know, Canon lenses on a Sony mirrorless body, you can't expect that they've done the mapping for every possible combination. So this is not a button that's going to work for everyone all the time. But when it works, well, I feel like I owe Adobe a thank you. Thank you for making me a better lens than I actually have, or at least the illusion of a better lens than I actually
David,
have.
what was the name of that correction lens that you just clicked on?
So I just turned on the button, the Enable Profile Corrections, within lens correction. And it sensed what camera, what lens. It doesn't always get it right. It gets it right 99% of the time, but not always. Just for visual variety, let me show this one more time. I know this is a landscape photography show, but I think this becomes really apparent with architecture photos. And here I'm using a 24mm lens, a wide-angle lens, and you can see how it's bending these columns, how it's bowing the geometry. When I turn this on, can you see how it flattens out that bowing?
Yes.
And so it does two things. It removes both some of the geometric distortion, that's what this controls, some of the pin cushion, if you will, and it removes some of the vignetting, some of the darkening of the corners. On this photo, it's the distortion, the geometric distortion, that's the most visible. In the other photo, it's the vignetting that's most visible. And what's so cool here is there are times when you want the distorted geometry, there are times when you want the vignetting. So a little further down, we have these controls where I can decide whether I want it removed or whether I want to keep it. Or, in the case of the vignette, should the corners go dark? Should the corners go light? And that's what these last two, or these two controls down here do, is they let you decide, should I have some of that correction, but not all of the correction? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
And what I think is amazing about this is I'm spending every penny I can scrounge on the best camera lenses I can afford. Both of these photos were shot with Canon L, their highest quality, fanciest level lenses. But even at the highest quality lens, we still have vignetting. We still have geometric distortion. But as a photographer, that's not what I want to show in my image. What do you think?
That's almost in the realm of magic.
It's almost in the realm of magic. It really is. And
It's just almost magic.
There's your new name, David, the magic of Lightroom.
it is. It's one of those things, like I don't work for Adobe. I have no incentive to sell you on Lightroom. But one thing I can tell you is that Lightroom makes my photos look better than they really are. I'm getting the appearance of a better lens than I actually own. I'm getting better color than I'm getting so much flexibility and so much improvement over what was actually captured.
Mm-hmm.
I love it.
Now, David,
Sure.
I'm thinking maybe I don't think I've been to one of your seminars, but maybe I was like sleeping or something and listening to, because we have the exact same flow in Lightroom. It's great. I go down to camera calibration and then go to lens corrections, click that, and then move up.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that, one of the reasons I sort of teach this is I wish that Lightroom's develop module flowed from the top down. That is how it's designed. We're supposed to start in basic and work our way down, but there are these other buttons for folks who shoot in RAW. I would say for folks like you and me, Kevin, working on landscape photos that are not at the top. And so my actual pattern is go pick a better film, better starting point, fix the flaws in my lens, then go back up to the basic panel and come down from there. I wish I could rearrange these into a logical order, but I can't. What I can learn is a pattern, and it sounds like you and I have basically the same pattern. In fact, I would bet that a lot of folks with Lightroom experience are going to say, yep, that's the same pattern I follow.
Yeah.
We have a couple of things, if I could just
Sure.
ask here. Okay, I'm selecting this. Richard Kramer has asked, how is this different from tone curve medium contrast? And I don't know if that... Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
So I think Richard's question was about the camera profile button.
Yeah, it might have been.
Yep, I think it was. I saw it flash on the side. And
Okay.
the answer there is that they're both similar and different in that when you pick the profile, you are indeed adding contrast. That's what the tone curve settings do, whether it's high contrast, medium contrast, or low contrast. But the camera profile is also changing the level of saturation, the strength of color. So it's as if you're doing tonal contrast and a boost to the saturation slider. It's as if you're doing 2-in-1 back there. So just picking tone curve medium contrast is going to push the ends of your histogram, where's my camera, further out, right? It's going to add that snap, but it's not supposed to. So it's going to push them further out, but it's not supposed to change the level of intensity of our colors.
Okay. And Richard did say yes, the profile button. So now, just because in the order of time, I am going to read these two. One, a comment, and maybe you can comment on this, David. Another comment, the correct chromatic aberration button, not sure of the button name, can be extremely beneficial. That's
yes.
Seems like
one of the other features in the lens correction panel is the ability to remove chromatic aberration, and I can demo this. But simple synopsis: our lenses have many types of flaws: vignetting, geometric distortion, and then this hard to pronounce one, chromatic aberration. And that's when we start to see weird colored fringes around what ought to be a clean edge. And amongst the magical things that the geniuses at Adobe have done is they've figured out how to remove the vignetting. They've also figured out this amazing formula to remove some of these weird color fringes. Let me show you one, because that's another. It wasn't the feature of the lens panel I meant to demo, but it's a marvelous one. So give me just a second here. Let me see if I can do this again. Cross your fingers. Going to screen share. There we go. And let me grab a photo. Let me zoom in on this photo here. And I'll show an area. Let me zoom this way in. Let me zoom it in, say, over here. Can you see a green and purple stripe around those windows?
Yep.
That's chromatic aberration. What's happening there is that what ought to be a nice edge is showing the scattering of light, either light passing through the window, but more likely light passing through my lens. Now, I had to zoom in the right place. Let me zoom back out to show this. I had to zoom in at the side of my photo and along something that ought to be a nice edge. You're never going to find the flaw smack dab in the center. Let's not sweat the physics, but chromatic aberration happens at the sides of our photo where there ought to be a nice edge. And in fact, what Adobe has done is they've made this brilliant button in the lens correction panel to remove that flaw. And so when I click this one on, can you see that purple and green stripe disappear?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, flaws in our lens. We have vignetting, we have geometric distortion, we also have this scattering of light, and they've figured out a way to make that disappear as if I had better glass than I actually own. Now, to be fair, the more you spend on your camera lens, the less of this flaw you're supposed to have. Like the L in Canon, the L Canon means low dispersion, less chromatic aberration. The Nikon lenses, the Sigma, what does Sigma say? APO, I think. You know, the higher the quality glass plate, the less of this flaw you're supposed to have. But all lenses have this flaw. You can see it perhaps side by side. Let me zoom this in one further here. Can you see the purple stripe on the left? Yeah. And how there's no purple stripe on the right?
Yes.
So whoever asked this question, thank you. This was not a feature I'd intended to demo, but if you're going to go fixing the flaws in your lens, you might as well fix both the geometric bowing, the vignetting, and the aberration. And so to bring this, say, to Lightroom 5, because folks like Kevin and I have been pushing these buttons again and again, in Lightroom 5, not in 4 or previous, Adobe added this little tab, the basic tab. And so we can turn on this and save ourselves the trip into those other two. In fact, we can turn on both of these and a new feature that's supposed to say make our walls more vertical, like so. all sorts of neat new tricks in Lightroom 5. Let me show the before and after here. Bode, vertical.
Oh, I like it.
Correction.
But that's not really fair. This is an architecture shot, and I'm supposed to be talking about landscape photography.
Okay, we had another comment here. I'll just go quickly on this one. For those of us, this is from Chris Whiting, those of us without the fastest processing computer, Lightroom runs better if lens corrections are done last. Do you have a comment on that, David?
I think that's probably true. I think there are other buttons as well, like clarity and sharpening, that you might also want to delay using if your computer is already chugging along. So yes, I personally have poured my money into the souped-up computer because I hate waiting around.
All right.
But I think
So
Chris Whiting is probably giving good advice there.
We'll thank Chris for that. Now, here's one more, and then we'll let you finish. David, can you explain the setup menu and its options, default, auto, custom, that shows up when you check enable profile connections in lens correction panel?
Oh, hi, Jan. That one's from Jan Kabili, and this is a loaded question because she knows enough to call me out if I get this wrong. Oh boy.
Way to go, Jan.
Let's see. I don't know the official Adobe explanation, but here's how I would explain it, and I may well be wrong. Let's see if I can start the screen share one more time. When you go in here and you pick the profile, this setup, well, how do I explain this? The default is letting Lightroom read the metadata and guess at what's going on in here. The custom is where you could define this camera and this lens and then save it out as a new setting. So, for example, if I work with, say, let me pick a completely wrong lens. Let me pick something that's totally wacky here. Well, I need something more visibly wacky than that. Let's pick something that just, there we go. Something that messes it all up. But let's pretend that this was Canon lens, a Canon camera Sigma lens. And you could dial all these in until they were right, and then you could save it as a new one. And that could be your new default when it reads it. But the one that I can't explain is how auto differs from the standard behavior. So you got me there, Jan. I still don't know how auto is different than the default or the custom.
And I don't either. So
All right. Well, what we should probably do is watch our time here, David, and we have about 7 minutes to finish up what you've done. And we thank everybody for these questions. And it could be that David might be able to go through the questions, and we could have.
Let me try and share my screen, and let me know if we're now back into Lightroom.
Yes, you're in Lightroom.
Awesome. So what I was gonna finish with was showing that Lightroom and other programs play well together, and that there are some wonderfully magical buttons in Lightroom, but that sometimes working with Lightroom and other software, in particular Color Efex Pro from Google, Nick, can give me more than I would get quickly and easily out of Lightroom alone. So here's Old Faithful. I shot this about a week ago teaching a Yellowstone in winter photography workshop. And just to show some of the buttons that I had talked about earlier in the evening, I usually start down here in the camera calibration tab because this is a raw file. And so what I'm going to do is pick a better film. I'll pick something like landscape. And in a single click, I think you'll see a dramatic change in the color and contrast of this photo. Working my way back up, I'm going to create the appearance of a better lens. And I think here you'll see some of that geometric bowing gets flattened out. Since the question came up about chromatic aberration, oops, let me zoom in rather than zooming out. And let me zoom way in, because you can see, I think here, these red and green stripes around the trees.
Yeah.
That's the flaw. That's light passing through the sides of my lens where there ought to be a clean edge. It gets aberrated. And so in Lightroom, we have this wonderful, magical switch where I turn this on, and my lens just got so much better. I mean, that is just amazing. I think the programmer responsible for it is named Eric Chan, and if I'm right, I think we photographers should buy him the nicest gift basket ever.
That's the magic button.
Unbelievably
Magic.
cool. So here in Lightroom, there's a lot of stuff I could do, and I would. I would make the photo brighter. I would draw out some detail. I might, control my shadows, my whites, my blacks, my vibrance, my clarity, all sorts of buttons. But what I often find is that with landscape photos, a little bit extra on top just pushes it that much further. And often that little extra for me comes from mixing Lightroom with the Nick Google Color Efex Pro software. So let's hope this doesn't break things this time. I'm going to tell Lightroom to send a copy over to Color Efex. And I know you guys have had a number of guests on recently talking all about the suite of software that Nick, Google offer, Silver Efex Pro, and just some wonderful stuff. I just want to show my two favorite little filters within here. I think for me as a landscape photographer, this panel that they call the tonal contrast panel is by far my favorite. And what it lets us do, let me zero these guys out real quick. What it lets us do is it lets us add contrast to certain tonal ranges. And I picked this because I think the gray Steam from Old Faithful is a prime example of a mid-tone. If I crank the contrast up there, let's see what happens. Wow. Do we get that like HDR look? What we're doing is we're accentuating the lights and darks within this shade of gray, within this tonal range. Now that looks a little overdone to me, but it can really make that Steam blend in with the sky or stand out from the sky. Because it's a distinct tone, upping its contrast makes it pop against the sky behind it. So I'm just going to use a little what I'd call finishing here to turn this is what I had in Lightroom, into this. Or let me show it side by side, and let me set it Lightroom style. On the left is the before, on the right is the after. Now it's probably not all that apparent. Let me make it a little more pronounced. There we go. And let me add one more filter. The other filter I love in the Nick Color Efex software is Brilliance and Warmth. And what I love about it is this little slider called Perceptual Saturation. I can't tell you exactly what it does. I can say as an analogy, it's like the Vibrant slider in Lightroom. But what I love about it is I can kick the strength of color up, and I can be pretty sloppy. Let me pull this guy up, I don't know, 20 or 30. For comparison, if I crank up the usual saturation slider, 20 or 30, it starts to look kind of phony, pretty fast. But the perceptual saturation seems to be a little gentler and just a little bit more believable. So let me show you the before and after here in Nick. On the left is the before, on the right is the after. Or better, for a real comparison, let me save my work so that we can see what I have using Lightroom and Color Efex Pro versus using just Lightroom alone. Now again, I'm working fast and sloppy, but back here in Lightroom, let me pick these two files. Let me compare them side by side on the screen. The one on the left is the Lightroom and Nik together. On the right, Lightroom only. What do you think?
Huge difference. Yeah.
Huge difference?
Huge.
And this is where I hope, if I can leave you sort of one moral, it's that Lightroom is a phenomenal developer. It's a wonderful digital darkroom. Sometimes it's all I need. But if it isn't, Lightroom plays well with others, with Photoshop, with Nik, with Topaz. I'll use whatever it takes to make a photo that pops, to make a photo that looks, well, hopefully something like this, that really rises up off the screen. There we go. How's that?
Great.
And let me end my screen share if we haven't already. Perfect. Thanks, y'all.
Very good. Oops. Kara's muted.
Muted, she is. Unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Good. I just want to thank you, David, for taking the time. And now, are you done with our segment then tonight?
That's all I got.
Okay.
So, all the
well, it's absolutely amazing. And one of the wonderful things that about the Landscape Photography Show, having had you on several times, from someone just starting and working with Lightroom, I'm so delighted to be able to go to David's 8-hour class in Las Vegas on Saturday. And I'm now going to have an insight to these buttons. And for those of you who are listening who haven't purchased Lightroom yet, and I know I just saw it on the Adobe shop, on the Adobe page, that you can still subscribe to both Lightroom, the Photoshop, $9.99 a month. Is that right? I mean, you guys have seen it. And
that's what I do.
What's that, Margaret?
That's what I do now.
Yeah, right. And so anyway, and then the other thing is that I want to blow this horn for David, because you really can hire him on an individual basis to help you, and he actually takes control of your computer, so you don't really have to know what you're doing. He will do it for you. And once he gets it set up, then you can just go, and those buttons, I totally get where they are now, so I'm really excited to use them. And David, we will put the links to your workshops coming up, because you have some wonderful workshops. And why don't you just tell us what are the couple that you have that are coming up, and we'll put the links on there also, because that's what this is all about, helping us get better.
Well, thank you so much. Well, let's see. This weekend, I'll get the pleasure of spending a day with you teaching for the Nevada Camera Club down in Las Vegas. I then go, a week later, I go up to the Arctic again for another Northern Lights photography class. Unfortunately, that one's full for this year, but I'd love to go back next year if folks are interested. Let's see. In April, I go to Blackberry Farm, gorgeous resort on the edge of Great Smoky in Tennessee. In June, to the Spruce Point Inn on the coast of Maine, teaching a coastal Maine photography class. I do that. I'm forgetting something in the summer, but come fall, I'll go back to Yellowstone for a fall photography workshop. And the big one for me is to Switzerland for a Landscapes and Lightroom combo class with my good friend Matt Anderson and the Viewfinder Center for Photography in Zurich.
Wow,
cool.
I think that's my whole year.
Okay, well, we'll have links for you there. And now we're gonna go back to Jim Warthman, and Jim is going to share our photographers to watch. And we create a circle with all these photographers, which will be posted. And we also create a circle with everyone who's checked yes or maybe for this show, and you're all included in that. So, Jim.
All right. Thanks, Kara. Let me share my screen. And okay, there it is. So I'm going to start with Richard Valenti. And actually, Kevin had to drop off, Kevin Rowe. But Richard was Kevin's pick. And I think you can see why. I mean, Richard does some just gorgeous work. Great composition, lovely colors, and a monochrome work. So that's Richard Valenti, and hope when Kara posts the circle and the links, by all means, go take a look.
His work's awesome.
Enjoy
that, yeah.
My pick, and I'm going to probably get the name wrong, was Annick Jacolard, French-Canadian, and she lives now in Switzerland. I love the atmospheric feel of a lot of her work, and great attention to detail. The more I look at her images, the more I see, and it's, you know, she's obviously very, very careful when she composes, and you know, just beautiful, beautiful work. And also, one thing you'll notice is that she includes some interesting quotes or song lyrics or whatever in most of her posts. It's a very entertaining read and great photos. So she doesn't have that many followers. Take a look again and hopefully follow her. Next is Margaret's pick.
This is a guy named Beach Bum Brian. I'm sure that's not his real name. I think I asked one time what it was, and he wouldn't tell me. But this, I got acquainted with him in a contest where I was asked to pick an honorable mention. And this is a photograph I really fought for. It has everything. I love the turtles there on the beach, and he's lives on the north shore of Oahu, which sometimes has just stunning landscapes, and I love the sun there, the sunset, the turtle, of course, just incredible. And obviously this is a time when the ocean is very peaceful, and I just loved it. It just has everything there. And then the other one I selected is one where the ocean was not so peaceful. That's got to be about a 25-foot wave there. That's Kelly Slater, I think you said it was. And that may be at Pipeline. There is the wave it looks like, but just incredible sort of North Shore photographs, and he only has like 5,000 followers, so he's an incredible photographer and just wonderful work. So rush out and circle him. I think he's going to be a huge hit on Google+, and just has wonderful work.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. Okay, Tom, what's your pick?
Hi. I picked Hubert J., who's an amateur photographer based in Warsaw, Poland. And from the looks of his photos, he currently travels quite a lot. This particular shot was taken in Bryce Canyon National Park in Utah, and I really like the soft colors and the mist in the background. It's obviously an early morning shot, so this one appealed to me. The next shot here, it was taken in France, and I love the this piece of rock sticking up through the clouds and people on top of it. So this shot appealed to me as well.
Yeah, great.
I'm not sure about those people at the very top.
Well, maybe that was photoshopped in. That's
I think you're crazy.
That's Chamonix. I haven't been there, but I believe that's where you get off the train. Or train or gondola. But that's the Guy de Mid. I'm butchering the French. Apologies.
Okay.
I figured it looked pretty safe because it had railings around there, so I thought he probably didn't climb up from the bottom.
Nice. Okay. Thanks, Tom. And now to Kara.
Okay. This is a shot by my home, and she's from Vietnam, and the misty feel from it, her shots in Vietnam are so close to the culture. You can just feel what she's shooting there, and I loved the way the light came through the mist. So this was a lovely shot that she shared with us.
Okay, beautiful.
And this is another one. She really does have a talent for getting those light rays when she's focusing on a subject. So there she's got a local girl in the rays coming through. So it really is an interesting kind of theme that she has with her shots, and I would strongly suggest you follow her, as she is really shares her culture beautifully.
Super. Thanks, Cara. Okay, now let me try something here, and we'll see if this works. I had a different window open, but I'm going to try to do it. Does that show up?
Jimmy
Yes.
Chin?
Yeah.
We see him.
And that's David's.
All right. I apologize. I know that the theme is landscape photography, but I recently discovered that that Jimmy Chin is on Google+, and this is a climber, skier, photographer, videographer whose work I have admired for years. He shoots for National Geographic. He shoots for Outside. This is one of the world's premier climbers. This is Conrad Anker, and Jimmy Chin is just someone who's going places on Earth that most of us will never go, and he's a phenomenally talented visual artist. I like that his little bragging rights on Google Plus says, "I skied off the summit of Mount Everest once," which is true. That is actually true. He was part of the only team to ski from the summit. Definitely, I call him an adventure photographer, but someone whose photos and words, I think, have a lot to them.
Excellent.
And I think this is another shot from
another Jimmy Chin's, and I picked this one. I picked this one not only because it's a beautiful photograph, but I think the article that accompanies it over there on the sidebar about the rules for adventure photography and expedition photography are totally worth reading.
That's
awesome
magnificent.
shot.
That's magnificent.
Okay. Thanks, David.
Well, thank you.
And I was going to say, and it's ironic that he's only got like 300 Google Plus followers.
Oh, well, he'll have more after we're putting him in the photographers to watch, and we're editing the show together. Okay, so those of you who are still with us, we will have a full edited part 1 and part 2, and we thank David so much for coming back and just really inspiring us with our editing skills. And so stay tuned for episode number 27. Those of you who have been watching the Sony mirrorless camera, we are going to have a representative who this week is in Fashion Week doing a great shoot. But we will have Rob Shelley with us and be explaining some of the wonderful features on that camera. Then that will be February 25th. Episode number 28 will be a discussion with panel members on various equipment that can help you, fun things that might improve your ability to take photos. And then on the 25th of March, we will have Dan Hughes back, and he will be talking about focus stacking demonstration and different examples, including some macro ideas. So we have some good shows coming up in 2014. We thank you. We appreciate you hanging in there with us as we navigate through cow pies and Google Gremlins. And you have a great week, and we'll see you for episode 27 on February 25th. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good night.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.
David.
It's an honor.
Thanks, David.
Dave.